Hi, you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation. Woo! Hey. Yeah.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? You know, I felt I had to do a separate video about this whole story of Shakur Stevenson and Joet Gonzalez's sister that Shakur Stevenson has been dating, and how they actually disowned, the father actually disowned his daughter for dating Shakur Stevenson. I started to talk about this and get into it deeper on my post-fight video after Shakur beat Gonzalez, but I said, no. This deserves its own segment for sure. Because what we have witnessed when this man, Joet Gonzalez, when he did his interview with ESPN trying to explain why his father does not, or his family does not accept Shakur Stevenson at all, is what I've been talking about on this channel since day one. Because what Joet Gonzalez admitted in that interview is his family are a bunch of racists, and they're not going to accept Shakur Stevenson no matter what he does, no matter how successful he is, no matter what he does, based on his skin complexion. Okay, now before I go deep, let me go ahead and shout out all the Mexicans that are not racist. All the Mexican fans that called up to my radio show and they said, man, I completely understand what you're saying, Dante. You know, I have some of these people in my family and we argue all the time, and they just keep it real. I want to shout those people out because what I'm about to say, of course, is going to be the whole truth, but it's directed to the racist only, okay? I'm not going to blame it on the entire race, but everything that I'm saying is directed to the racist people in this race. The truth about America, boxing, and racism reared its ugly head in this story. It was exposed, and a lot of people, they kind of lightly touched on this. It's like once people, you know, because it started off, at first Gonzalez, he came out and said, oh, we don't get along, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and nobody really understood what he meant. I think a lot of us was hoping this had nothing to do with race, was hoping, please tell me they didn't disown this girl because she's with a black man, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, that turned out to be the case. You know, one of the most famous, if not the most famous Mexican celebrity in America, George Lopez, for years I used to watch some of his comedy, and before, he used to always talk about his racist grandmother. He says she's racist, she doesn't like black people, and he would always make, you know, jokes about the stuff that she would say about black people. But I guess over the years, he got a little bit bolder and just said, let me stop beating around the bush and tell people what we all think about black people. So more recently, like about a year or two ago, and I find this pretty ironic because it was like only 2 or 3 months after Donald Trump said that Mexicans were rapists and killers and we gonna build a wall and basically kick them all out of the country. About a couple of months after Donald Trump said that, George Lopez, he makes the news. Something he said on one of his stand-ups, it went viral. He basically said, the two things you don't do in a Mexican family is park in our driveway or bring home a black person. Now, the first thing I was wondering is like, wait a minute, Donald Trump and the millions of people that voted for him simply because he showed his disdain for Mexicans, you don't have a problem letting those people in your house, but you're going to say there's going to be a problem if you bring a black person home, and it doesn't matter if that black person is a millionaire, if he's a doctor, if he just has a good ass job, if he doesn't have a job, no matter what his status is, if he's black, you can't let him in. And once again, before I continue, please understand this. The reason why I'm exposing this is because I want it to end. I mean, if it doesn't end, if this suppresses it, that's okay. But I'm exposing it for what it is because people want to keep this quiet. Once again, like I said, you had a lot of people that heard this story and they were pretty much like, oh, we already know what this means. They were hinting they knew this had something to do with race, but not too many people was talking about it. And that's why I wanted to make sure we talk about it and expose it, because you cannot allow these racists to feel comfortable. So when the racist people are in the comment section like, please don't talk about this, stop talking about this, that means you got to talk about it even more, because you're making them feel uncomfortable, and that's what we want to do. Now let's get back into it. Now you guys have heard me say before, believe it or not, at least 90 to 95% of the most racist messages that I receive in my comment section comes from Mexican fans. But I do want to distinguish the two, because you have Mexican fans in Mexico, and then you have Mexican fans that live in America, and they are the complete opposites. What I've learned is a lot of the Mexicans from Mexico, they're not racist at all towards black people. Surprisingly, it's a lot of the Mexicans that live right next door to black people in America that happen to be racist. And that's never made any sense to me. It's never made any sense to me at all, because I grew up around Mexicans where I had a lot of Mexican friends, and all of the Mexicans, they grew up kind of the same way black people did. We grew up in the same neighborhoods. For the most part, we listened to the same music. You know, from junior high to high school, I would always see a Mexican listening to hip hop, listening to oldies, like I'm Your Puppet, wearing Michael Jordan shoes, wearing Laker jerseys, wearing, all type of jerseys with black people's names on them, black clothing brands, etc., etc., etc. But while some of these guys were doing this, they didn't like black people. Think about that. I remember when I think I was about 10 years old. I was outside playing with a Mexican kid. The mom, she comes out, she tells him to come in. I find out later on, the kid tells me my mom said I can't play with black people. She tells her 10-year-old kid this, and she couldn't even speak English. She had just came over here to the country, and she's telling her kid not to play with a black kid. When my sister was around 8 or 9 years old, she's like 9 years younger than me. I remember she used to always play with this Mexican girl. It was like her best friend. They would play every day. And one day, this Mexican girl, her cousins came over to hang out there. And they were like about 1 or 2 years older. When they seen her playing with my sister, the first thing they said was, "What are you doing playing with N-words?" These are like 9 and 10-year-old kids saying this. What are you doing playing with N-words? My son's first day of school, my older son, first day of school in first grade. He's in school, and the teacher, they allow us to come and basically, come to class for the first day and, sit around and look at things for like the first 20 minutes of class, right? I see this big, huge Mexican kid. This is the first grade. This Mexican kid, he got a shaved head. He looks like he's in the 5th grade. Anyway, he's in the class. He's one of the students. We go home. My son comes home and he said, "Dad, a kid got suspended on the first day of school. He got suspended." I said, "Which one?" He said, "Did you see the big Mexican kid with the shaved head?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What did he do?" He said he called some black girl a bitch and the N-word. In first grade, he's calling black people the N-word. Believe it or not, a lot of the racism that I found out about when it comes to Mexicans are from my Mexican friends, because they would actually look out for me and they would tell me things. Sometimes maybe it's when they get drunk, or sometimes they tell me even when they're sober. I had a friend at the gym. His name was Fernando. He worked at the gym and he followed my YouTube channel. Sometimes we would get into conversations talking about boxing and everything in life. And we started talking about everything from boxing to the double standards that exist. And this is what led Fernando to say something I couldn't believe he said. He told me, he said, "I'm gonna be honest with you, Dante." He said, "Mexicans are very racist." He said, "When I was a little kid, we used to call black people the N-word like it was normal." He kept saying, it was normal. It was normal. We were taught to say it as if it was a complete norm. Calling a black person the N-word was just like calling him a black person. This is what he said to me. I think Fernando, he's like in his 50s. He's like in his 50s, I'm guessing. But yeah, this is what he admitted. And when you listen to what he just said, it lines up perfectly with what George Lopez said, what that little kid in first grade said to the black girl, what that little kid said about my sister. It all lines up now. But see, this is the difference once again from me and you racists. I can deal with racism from any race, and I will never look at someone who treats me with respect differently because of what someone else in his race did to me, if that makes sense. Because I've heard on a couple occasions some guys say, or some girl say, my parents, they don't like black people because of some bad experience they had with a black person. But I've had bad experiences with almost every single race. In some races, I've had many bad experiences, but never did I think I'm gonna blame it on the entire race. Because whenever I had a bad experience in that race, the next week, I'll run into some guy who's trying to help me out. You know, I'll have a guy, my car will break down. Some guy, he'll come out and fix my car, run to the store, go get parts, and then didn't even want any money when I tried to give it to him. And this is the reason why it is impossible to try to blame an entire race on one or two bad experiences you had with someone within that race. Because, for example, imagine if you are rushed to the hospital, you're having a heart attack, or you need a heart transplant or something. You wake up just to find out after surgery, it was a black doctor that saved your life. At the end of the day, like I told you guys before, I know tons of girls, Mexican girls, some that I dated, some that I was friends with, and they would just always give me the lowdown. You know, there were girls that I knew was telling me that their sister had a black boyfriend, and the dad was just so disappointed. He was so angry. He kept trying to bribe her to break up with the guy. He said, I'll buy you a brand new car. I'll give you some money if you just break up with this guy. I heard stories similar to that on a regular, completely on a regular. I'm gonna give you one more, but please know, growing up in Long Beach, California, I have at least 200 stories when it comes to this. Now, I remember I was working out in Orange County. I was working out there in a department. I worked in a hospital. Now, this is obviously way before I was doing YouTube videos. But anyway, I'm in this department that is predominantly Mexican. I think it was maybe two other black people that worked in this department, and probably about 8 Mexican employees. The crew chief was Mexican, kind of an older Mexican lady. Not that old, she just was older than me. Maybe in her 30s at the time, so she wasn't that old. Anyway, she was talking to me one day. You know, I'm sitting here, and she's talking to me, and she's telling me how her husband is so religious. Oh, she said he's religious. He goes to church all the time. He loves to praise to Jesus, etc., etc., etc. She's telling me all this stuff about him being a good Christian or whatever his religion was. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like in the middle of her telling me that, she says, oh, but he does not like black people. And she says it just like that. And she's saying this right in front of everybody who's working. She was so comfortable with saying it as if it was such a norm where she came from to admit something like that. And I was a lot younger at this time. I think I was probably around 23 or 24. And I just remember asking a question: how can a religious person that believes in Jesus be a racist at the same time? I mean, doesn't that make him an oxymoron? And she just was like, yeah, I know. I tell him, you know, I try to talk to him, but that's him though. And she's just, once again, she's just saying it so casual. You know, you would have thought that she would have just told me, oh yeah, you know, he loves to go out and eat, but he hates pizza. You know, that's how she made it sound like it was so minor. And remember, guys, this is the reason why George Lopez was so bold to say that out in the open, because he felt it was the norm. And it's so crazy because I could never imagine myself, especially as being the supervisor, and start talking to some Mexican girl or Mexican guy and says, oh yeah, you know, My girlfriend, oh boy, she loves to go to church, but she does not like Mexicans. Oh, she does not like Mexicans. Giggling like it's not even a serious deal. Do you know how offensive that is? But the coolest thing about that story with the Mexican lady talking about her religious racist husband, when she left the room, one of my coworkers, which was another Mexican lady, she was a little bit older, she had a daughter that had a black boyfriend, and she told me, she said, "I'm so happy you said what you said to her, because that was extremely offensive." And she said, "Because my daughter has a black boyfriend." She said, "I couldn't believe she was willing to just say that out in the open like that." But like I said, when you surround yourself with so many racist people, it becomes the norm to say some of the most outlandish stuff, and that's what happened with her. You know, the saddest part about this whole story, though, with Joet Gonzalez's father, is it's the father that's destroying that family. This guy is a racist and a complete idiot, because him following George Lopez's advice is going to leave his ass with a whole lot of regrets. He's destroying his whole family. I mean, first you disown your daughter because she's in love with a black man. Then you basically force your son into a fight with Shakur Stevenson, which he may never get over that loss because it was so much at stake. Can you imagine the pressure that was on Josh or on Joet Gonzalez? The pressure that was on him to win that fight? It's pretty much like you got your family telling you, you got to do this to bring honor back to our family. And it backfired. So now, once again, your daughter has been disowned. Your son has his first L on his record. He might end up blaming his dad on that eventually. But we don't know how he's going to recover. The dad got his own son's ass kicked because of his selfish, racist pride. And he needs to be called out on it. You're going to disown someone who possibly is more successful than anyone in Gonzalez's family. We already know that Shakur Stevenson is on the verge of being a millionaire really soon. And this is the guy that you want to disown, making these silly excuses. Yeah, he was sagging his pants or something ridiculous. See, this is the main thing that annoys me about racist people. If you're going to be a racist, why can't you guys own it? I mean, just admit it. But they won't do that. You know why? Because then they realize they're going to be looked at as the bad guy. They're going to be the ones looked at as the person with the problem. And they are the person with the problem. They are the person with the problem. And I'm telling you this right now, you ain't going to never hear no black family disowning their daughter or whoever because she's married or she's in love with a Mexican guy. Especially if he's on the verge of becoming a millionaire like Shakur Stevenson is, right? Once again, you know, it's an entirely different thing if a girl is dealing with a dude in prison, in and out of prison, he beating on her, he cheating on her every week. That would be a different situation. But we talking about a man that went to the Olympics and is only a couple of fights away from being a millionaire. The funny thing is I was watching, I'm always watching Netflix, and I was watching the Donald Trump documentary where it shows, you know, his life way before, when he was a lot younger. And I was surprised how so many media members were so impressed because he was so rich. They would just always call him the most eligible bachelor. Not because of his personality, not because of how good of a person he was, but simply because he was rich. I remember one TV host, he was talking about how much money Donald Trump had in the bank, and he said, "Boy, wouldn't you love your daughter to bring this man home?" But once again, when it comes to Shakur Stevenson, it's possible that he could be more successful financially than anyone in Gonzalez's family. And you're telling me you would rather your daughter meet some guy that works at Walmart just because he's not black, instead of meeting someone who will most likely be a millionaire within the next 2 years. It doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up. But you know, at the end of the day, seriously, Gonzalez's father, Joet Gonzalez's father, he needs to really think about what he's doing. I mean, you can almost say he's almost ruined two people's lives, you know, temporarily. He disowned his daughter, and now he just got his son's ass whooped just over his selfish racism and pride. So I'm gonna close out by saying this. I want to give a shout out to all the Mexican fans that I met out there at the fights, came over, took pictures with me. And the most interesting thing is a lot of Mexican fans that would come up to me, they would just volunteer information that, like, they would say stuff like, hey bro, I'm telling you, man, the stuff that you say about the racism is true because I have a lot of friends that talk like that, etc., etc. I go to fight parties and they'll be using the N-word and all kind of other racial slurs. So everything that you say is true, man. It's unfortunate, you know, and some of those guys I try to educate, but everything that you say is true. I've had a lot of Mexican fans that came up to me, and that's why, once again, I'm smart enough to distinguish the racist fans from the non-racist fans. So shout out to these Mexican fans that educate the racist fans. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.